Hello Silver Sisters, this is Joli from QuickSilverHair, and today I wanted to share with you about my journey to embracing my gray hair. It was a long journey. I was about 13 when we noticed my first gray hairs mingled in with my natural auburn color, and you can kind of see that here. I still have some. I have a little section across the back of my neck that is still my natural dark color. Anyway, when I was about 19, my hair was probably about 15% gray, and I really started dyeing it at that point, but I wasn't dyeing it to chase the roots or chase the gray. It was just, I was 19, I had a friend who was a hairstylist, and we were just having fun with coloring. So about 22, I had a really stressful experience, and I really noticed that my gray came on more prominently and a little more rapidly. It wasn't like Bride of Frankenstein or anything. It wasn't a shock and overnight I was white-headed. It wasn't like that at all. But I did notice that I had a white streak now, and I had another little streak over here you can see is white. That all became very obvious at that time. So I started dyeing my hair pretty faithfully every 4 weeks with my stylist, and we were using my favorite color from 𝐂𝐨𝐿, which was Cherry Cola. I loved that color because it turned the white hair a nice little red color, which made it look like I had a natural red highlight. In my early 30s, my stylist retired, so I started dyeing my hair myself with a permanent natural color from the health food store, which was a kind of a dark red. I liked it for a little while, but I really noticed that it was kind of flat, it was kind of non-dimensional, it had no depth, and I think of that line in Steel Magnolias of her talking about her brown football helmet, and I kind of felt that helmet feeling, and I was starting to get kind of tired of it. I was starting to get really bored with it. And I can remember in my early 30s, a friend came over with a friend of hers for dinner one night, and her friend had this beautiful straight chic short bob that was a beautiful charcoal color with a silver tinsel sprinkled throughout. And I just sat there thinking through the entire dinner, I couldn't stop looking at her hair, and I kept thinking, I wonder if that's what my hair looks like. I wonder if it's that beautiful and if I've just been covering it up. So for the next few years, I had a couple of false starts, and I would, just go a little bit longer and a little bit longer between dye jobs, which meant that, I would get this demarcation line and I could kind of see where it was at. And I would re-dye it because there was times when I felt like it just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough white hair, and I was afraid it was going to look mousy, which now I don't even like that word. I don't like the word mousy because everybody has their own version of their natural color with the white mixed in, and I think for the most part they're all very beautiful colors, and I wish I hadn't judged myself that way because I think it would have been fun to watch my natural transition without dye. So anyway, I remember one time I was going without dye again for quite a little while. It had been a while because I remember I had quite a bit of growth out, so I was probably 3 months maybe. And I had a chiropractor appointment, and my chiropractor was out of the office that day. His dad was filling in for him. So we were catching up, and he was doing my adjustment. He got to the top of my head. He paused, and I looked up at him, and he says, "So what's going on here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "The gray hair, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of toying with the idea of ditching the dye and embracing my natural color. I was just kind of seeing where it's at right now." And he goes, "My wife is over 70 years old, and she has been dyeing her hair for our entire marriage. If she chose to stop dyeing her hair today, I would go to the store, buy a box of dye, bring it home, and dye it myself." And whoa, wow, that's a lot of boundaries to cross, right? But it rattled me. It rattled me a lot. And I went home that night with a box of dye, and I colored my hair. And I remember feeling like, wow, this person completely influenced me to do something to my hair, and that might not have been what I actually wanted. I continued dyeing my hair for a while after that, and I did not toy around anymore with going for weeks at a time between dye jobs and letting the roots grow out. But I did start researching. I started collecting images on Pinterest. I started following people like Yasmina Rossi, and I started looking at boards that I was filling up with curly silver hair and straight silver hair. And I really started inundating myself with that this could be beautiful, this could be okay. So I started doing some research on how I could transition. And I remember reading, or maybe it was a YouTube video, I don't know now, but I heard about this process where you leave the top undyed and dye the base. So you have basically what's going on with my hair now, where it's darker underneath and lighter on top. That was one way to transition. Another way to transition was to dye the top and let the bottom grow out underneath it, kind of in secret. There's a technique now called the dye strip technique, where you dye a section of hair and part that dyed hair over and allow the underneath to grow out while you can cover it up and not be so obvious. So basically I did the opposite of the dye strip technique and let my white streak grow out. I had my stylist highlight this section of hair, and then I dyed the red around it. So I would section that part out and I let that grow in white. I loved it. It was kind of like Bonnie Raitt, and I really loved Bonnie Raitt's white streak with her red hair. So I rocked that for a couple of years. And then when I was 39 in 2015, which was just a couple of years after I grew my streak out, I decided that I wanted to be my natural color by 40, which I was a little short-sighted to make that decision in January 2015 because it was only 6 months away to my 40th birthday. However, maybe, I don't know what I was thinking, but maybe I was just thinking by 40 I would be done with dye. So I was. And about 4 or 5 months into the process after ditching the dye, I decided to do a gray blending. And I called all around town looking for Olaplex, somebody that to do Olaplex. It was fresh on the scene, so really nobody knew anything about Olaplex at that time. I eventually gave up on the concept, and I went into a salon where they did what is called double lowlights. And they basically, lowlights are like highlights. They're done with foil, or, you know, pieces are strategically picked throughout your head. And in this case, they dyed it 1 shade darker than my red and 1 shade lighter than my red to blend the demarcation line. Which in retrospect, I would not have done that. I would have skipped that. And maybe I would have done something like keeping the red dye fresh, or going with a brown color that I just kept dyed with a fresh color so it didn't fade. Because one problem with red dye is it fades off very coppery and very brassy, and it can be kind of annoying. Struggled with that part. But again, I would not go back and do the lowlights again, because when she blended it, it went all the way to my roots, and it kind of meant that I had to start over in a way. However, it did do the blending. The line got disrupted because it basically, you go from a demarcation line like this to like this. So it helped, and that was fine. A couple of months later, I think it was July of 2015, I did the dumbest thing and walked into a salon that had, walk-in welcome sign on the sidewalk, and I asked if someone could cut my hair because I was getting a little impatient with the length and the demarcation line and so forth. So I decided I would go as short as I could stand, which was jaw length, and I had the gal do an A-line bob. She did do an A-line bob, but it was the worst chop job I've ever had in my life. I had pieces of hair back here that were like 3 inches long, and I had pieces that were 9 inches long, and so Over the next couple of months, I kind of tamed that myself and evened it out. But I still needed help because now my hair was short enough that I needed to keep it trimmed. So I found a stylist who was very supportive, and every 2 months until October of 2016, she would trim off a little bit, and we kept it at jaw length. So about every 2 months I would go in and have about 1 inch cut off. So I was growing 1 inch and cutting 1 inch. So it was, you know, making that demarcation line disappear a little faster. I remember the day she cut off the last of the dye, she said, "So that was it?" And I said, "What was it?" And she goes, "That was the last of the dye. It just hit the floor." And it really didn't sink in. It didn't register until I was in the car and on the way home. And I went, "I'm done. I'm done. It's over. There's no more dye." So that was really cool. That was really fun. If I had one piece of advice, I would say, actually it's 2 pieces of advice. One, pick your battle. Decide what you're going to do. Are you going to dye your hair to blend it? If so, do that, be done with it, and move on. Are you going to keep your hair long? If so, I'd say ditch the dye, you know, maybe freshen up the ends as you go. But, you know, I think impatience gets the worst of us. And I think we try to do too many things at one time, trying to get there faster. So, you know, embrace the process of waiting, because no matter what choice you make, whether you shave your head and want to grow your hair long, or you decide to do the long grow out cold turkey, it's going to take time for you to remove all that dye. And the only way to remove all that dye is to grow it off. Now, we can play with it with color, we can bleach it, we can do all these other things, but all of those processes are potentially damaging to your hair. So you kind of have to decide how healthy you want your hair to be during this process. And while there's no wrong way to do this, I try to encourage people to do it in a way where you're going to feel the best about your hair while you're doing it. Take your time with it, because it will take time. You've been coloring your hair for years, and you can't undo that overnight. There's no possible way to undo that overnight unless you shave your head. But then, you know, the battle is growing that back out. Unless you actually like having your hair shaved, and then, you know, no battle. And just remember one thing, if you hate it when you get your hair grown all the way out, you know exactly what to do. Just go back and start dyeing it again. But at least you'll know. You'll know what you have going on underneath there, and the question will be answered. I hope you found this video helpful. You can see my transition slideshow. There is a link in the description box below. While you're down there, like, subscribe, share, and I hope to see you next time. Shine on, Silver Sisters.